So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I set up my camera for everyday documentation, and also works for pro work and different types of genres as well. I wanted to thank today's video sponsor, Squarespace. I've actually been using Squarespace for over 10 years now. Their templates and easy-to-use interface make it incredibly simple to create and maintain a professional-looking website without any coding experience necessary. My Squarespace website was an essential part of how I built my photography business. It allows me to showcase my best work on my portfolio, as well as share recent work on my blog, and ultimately be able to receive inquiries from potential clients through my contact form. If you're one of those photographers relying on your Instagram profile as the sole place to share your work and build your photography business, I would really consider making a website on Squarespace. You can visit squarespace.com/Reggie Ballesteros to start a free trial and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So when I'm operating the Fuji X100VI, I typically shoot it in either manual mode or in aperture priority. So when I'm shooting in manual mode, I have the shutter speed set to T. So when you set it to T, this allows you to change the shutter speed using the rear command dial, and this is just how I prefer it. I don't want to have to take my hand off of the grip in order to change the shutter speed. And then I change the aperture with the aperture ring like so. And then as far as the ISO goes, if I'm shooting in manual, what I do is I set the ISO to C. The front command dial can be changed to control the ISO. So that's what I do. So we have shutter speed in the rear command dial, aperture ring, and then the front command dial is ISO. This is how I shoot it, and I know it defeats the purpose of being able to have these dedicated dials, but for me, it's just not how I intuitively change my camera controls. If I'm shooting in auto mode, basically aperture priority, what I'll do is I'll set the shutter speed to A, which basically lets it be dictated by the camera, and then I change my ISO to ISO auto here. And then I have my front command dial set to exposure compensation, which you have to set your exposure compensation to C. So then basically now my front command dial lets me change the exposure compensation. And the way that I operate when I'm shooting this way is I'll point my camera at a scene, and then once I like how it looks, I'll lock in the exposure with the AE auto exposure lock. So once I do that, I can move around, compose how I like, and then I'll come in here, maybe refocus, and then change my exposure compensation to how I like. And then I'll take the photo from here. A lot of people say, what type of exposure compensation do you set it to? I change it based on every single different scene. It's not always a given. Sometimes I'm overexposing, sometimes I'm underexposing for a silhouette or something like that. My workflow is just lock the exposure and then adjust the compensation with the front command dial. It's so seamless that way. Another important thing to set if you're shooting in aperture priority or any type of auto mode is you want to go in to the shooting setting and go to your ISO auto settings. And here you can change your different minimum shutter speed. So here the minimum shutter speed is 1/160, which I find the best shutter speed to do for any type of documentation with human subjects, even if they're standing still. If they laugh, move a little bit, 1/160 of a second is the optimal that I've found out for my 10 years of shooting professional wedding photographs. And then I have two other banks, which is probably the coolest feature in Fujifilm is you can change different banks for different auto ISO settings. So I have 1/160, which is just for general hand holding, still life subjects. And then for low light, for still subjects or night scenes, I have 1/15 of a second, which is good in combination with the IBIS of the camera. And basically I can actually change this on the fly. If I go into here, I click the front command dial and I change it to auto ISO 2. And then you can see it's at 1/160, and then I can change it again, and it's 1/15. So you can pick based on the scene. If you're in nighttime, shooting night scenes, we'll shift it here. And then if I'm taking photos of my kids, then I'll shift it here. And then if I'm outside in daylight, taking photos of just regular stuff, nothing moving that's human, then I'll put it here. So going from auto ISO 1, 2, and 3. And then once you pick that setting, then you can go into your change it back to the exposure compensation. So when it comes to film simulation, how am I changing this? What am I setting? I always set 2 different film simulations for still photos. So I go in here and I have Reggie's portrait and Reggie's HV5 for C1, C2. And I set that to the function button at the top here. So basically I'm shooting, I want to go to black and white, I click the button, go down, and I'm here, shooting that way. And then I change it to the other one. A lot of people want to like, oh, what do you do with other film simulations? I just use these 2. This is kind of how I shoot, and I have shot wedding photography, 1 preset for color, 1 preset for black and white, and I just leave it at that. If you want to know more about my recipe settings, check out those linked down below, or I'll probably have something pop up here. And as far as focus goes, another thing that I do have is I have the face and eye detect at this front button here. I turn it on and off based on if I'm taking photos of my kids or anything like that. But I almost always have the focus mode on autofocus single. Even if I'm taking photos of my kid, autofocus single tends to be the fastest in low light and for subtly moving subjects. If the subject is moving left to right, I still keep it on autofocus single and I actually try to predict their movement. The only time I put it on autofocus continuous is somebody is predictably going closer to the camera. So going far and running back and forth. That's when I do that. For erratic type of movement for like toddlers and things like that, autofocus continuous still doesn't do that well, especially on the Fujifilm system. I wish it did better, but it doesn't. That's where you have to stop down your aperture and really try to predict where your subject is going to be, as opposed to trying to lean on the camera to focus, because Fujifilm is not have a strength of focus. That's where you need to bring your skills in terms of depth of field and predicting scenes and pre-focusing to the table to be able to get the best shots. That's how I do it. If you're coming from Sony or a different faster autofocusing system hoping you're going to get the same performance, you won't. You need to work on your autofocus skills. I'm just saying. A lot of Sony shooters don't have great autofocus skills because their camera just does it for them, and it's magic. It works so beautifully. But that's where, for example, when I drive around, I don't have good navigation skills because I use Google Maps. I just haven't built up that skill. It's neither here nor there. I'm not judging anybody. It's just kind of the reality of the camera operation for different systems. As far as the Q menu, so I use the Q menu in a specific way to have a lay over the land of what my settings are at the time. The biggest thing that I'm actually changing the most when I'm in here is the AI subject detection. I don't have a button set for that. So if I take a picture of my dog, I'm going to put it to the animal one. And then I also have my LCD brightness here. I keep it on a manual LCD brightness. For any type of non-super bright scenes, I put it at -3 because the X100VI brightness is actually super bright. I found on the X100V, -1 was okay. On my X70, -2 is okay. But yeah, for the X100VI, it's super bright. So if your screen is too bright, you'll notice that the shadows look brighter than they actually are. And you'll end up overexposing all your images all the time. So I found -3 is a good setting. And then if I go into bright daylight, I might put it to like 0 or +2. But then I always reverted back to -3. That's how I kind of calibrate my LCD for shooting JPEGs, which I share in another video about my tips for shooting in 100% JPEG. I do have one swipe function that I use a lot, is white balance. I have it right here. Typically, I have a white balance shift with Reggie's portrait, but if I'm shooting something like product photos of a specific color, I will put it in the ambience priority with no shift so that the reds can actually look red, purples look purple, whereas here it's going to have a skewed toward orange. And with that, my name is Reggie Ballesteros. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, please subscribe for more Fujifilm and Ricoh content. And if you want to see my go-to film simulation recipes for both Fujifilm and Ricoh, check out these 2 videos over here.